I call my panelists to the stage. Kevin Wallace from Dream Hospitality, Uday from Taj, and Rustom from Dusit. I'm going to sit around here. So this morning we're going to talk about investment initiative in emerging markets. So we heard a lot about, in the past few days, about the Sri Lanka. It's been very Sri Lankan and Maldives-centric. We're going to try to open up the discussion and see how the parallels are with some of the emerging markets in the region, like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. And for that, I'd like to start with entering a new market. Investment is, we have a lot of developers and investors in the audience, but obviously lots of operators here on the stage. So investing is also an investment for operators when entering a new market. Entering a new market has its challenges always, and I'd like to ask my panelists, how do you approach Sri Lanka on the map, and how do you compare it to other existing markets that you already developed? Maybe Kevin, you would like to start with that?
Yeah, historically, I think, as a lot of people in the room might know, I'm a big fan of Sri Lanka. I think Hiran Kure once said, the head of Jetwing, he once said at a panel I was with him on that, you believe in our country more than I do. This is about 5 years ago, just after the war. And there is definitely a lot of opportunity. It's got all the positives that any market here has, primarily from a tourism point of view, but also I think from a MICE point of view. You're going to see Colombo come into its own with all these hotels that are coming up along the Gulf face, the new Movenpick opening, and the Hyatt down the road, the Sheraton. You can go down the list, and a few others that are under planning. The issues here, though, I think are still a lot of the same that have been cited in the last couple of days. Infrastructure is still an issue. Air connectivity and carry is still an issue for a certain period here, and I think that's now stopped with Rio coming back in the market. There were no more charters coming in here. It was all scheduled flights, so that's got to come back. The scale of the operations here in terms of the number of rooms is still way below 100. I think it might even be around the 60 mark if you took everything into consideration. Now, if the strategy here is to be boutique, then great. It'll be the boutique resort capital of the world, and people will have a good time and they'll enjoy it. But I think a lot of the travelers that we see, particularly the ones who drive our business today, who are the Asian, or even in some countries that we'll get to later, the indigenous traveler within that country, that middle class is emerging, and they've got aspirations. They don't just lie by the pool. They don't just sit at the beach. They want other things to do, whether it's within the resort or whether it's restaurants or shops outside. So all that has to happen here, because if you've ever stayed in a Sri Lankan resort, it's pretty quiet when you go outside the gates. You don't have the same sort of activity going on, the same sort of variety when you go down country, as I would call it, along the west coast down to the south. So all these things, are hopefully going to be involved. I think, the government appears to be making noises to give more support to the industry. They want to open up certain areas. I think with that has got to come some better tax incentives. I think the phone-a-tour approach, as I so often call it, what the Mexicans did when they opened up their tour industry and actually developed enclaves and sites where they put in the roads, the telecommunications, the connectivity. I think all those things really need to happen here for this country to catch up. In 1983, it had the same size market as Thailand, 500,000 people. And if you look at the numbers today, Thailand's at 34, and they're at, I think, 1.8 here. So, a lot of things have happened in the last 30 years.
Correct. Do you think how long will that take for Sri Lanka to reach where Thailand, or maybe where Indonesia or Vietnam, Philippines are? Maybe you want to take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we work across the region, right?
Correct.
So we've got projects in Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, Indonesia, and looking to try and get into Malaysia as well. That's a tough one. And we, obviously look at the comparisons. And I think we've talked a lot over the last 2 days about what's holding Sri Lanka back. But ultimately we all see the potential. But I think opening the conversation up and trying to see best practice, we've talked about the connectivity, and you see Vietnam has just opened up its airways. Vietjet has just ordered 100 Boeing planes. That's going to fundamentally transform and open up the country. Vietnam's had a lot of comparisons to Sri Lanka in lack of connectivity, quite difficult to get to. But I think very poignant on the last panel, Sri Lanka's key selling point is its location. It's the closest to Europe for a sunny beach destination, right? And I think eliminating a lot of the other destinations, North Africa, even Turkey's not on the radar at the moment. Dubai and Middle East are very expensive and not the same experience. So, we all see the glaring potential of Sri Lanka, but there's still a lot that has to be done from the infrastructure perspective.
But still back to infrastructure.
Back to infrastructure.
Taj been here for quite a while, and looking at the other country in the region, what makes you focus on Sri Lanka more than the other country?
So the Taj has been in Sri Lanka for more than 30 years. So with Taj Samudra in Colombo, with the Taj Exotica in Bentota, and the airport garden near the airport in Colombo. So we've been here for a long time. We believe in the potential, the inherent strengths of the country that people have been talking about, much beyond just the sun and sand and the beach tourism, the culture, the heritage, wildlife. So that is one, the inherent possibilities in the country. The other is that from the Indian perspective, we're seeing a phenomenal growth in the Indian outbound market. And while it still isn't of the same scale as China, it's increasing at a very rapid clip. And so we foresee Sri Lanka being a very attractive new destination for the Indian traveler, primarily because of access. We have Colombo just 1 to 3 hours away from any part of the country, and it's an affordable destination. It's got lots of stuff to offer. So from our perspective, Sri Lanka is, I guess, very attractive. From the standpoint of infrastructure, while for obvious reasons the conflict that went on in Sri Lanka for the better part of 2 decades, while that has set it back as compared to the other locations in the region, I think it's also an opportunity for them to learn from some of the experiences of the other destinations and do some of the things in a more planned and a more organized manner, as opposed to some of the other destinations which may have grown in an unplanned fashion. So I see that also as a bit of an opportunity for the Sri Lankan government. We talk a lot about the infrastructure, but I think what Sri Lanka has managed to get right, for instance, is the road infrastructure that has been created in the south and west, and that has given a huge fillip to development in that part of the country. If Sri Lanka is able to similarly address the issues of access to other parts of the country, I think they will be in a position to benefit from some of that. I think the other big issue from development perspective is the financing, the clarity around fiscal incentives, etc. And from an investor's perspective, the ability to get an exit at a reasonable point in time. So I think from what we saw in the Dusit case, Rustom and his team, they've managed to figure out a model to do that. But I think it's important for the country to think about how it can give exits to the country, to the financial investor. Because in the absence of that, given that our business has a long lead time and all of that, that's a big constraint. And we face that challenge in India, where the development process takes a fair amount of time, and a lot of investors don't have the patience and have requirements to return capital, etc. So I think if they can get their act together with REITs, with strengthening the capital markets, I think that would go a long way towards improving the investment climate in the country.
If I can just add on to that.
Please.
5 years ago, we were looking at investing in Sri Lanka or Maldives. Really good base case example. Sri Lanka had just come out, the potential was huge. So there was an obvious interest to invest here for the upside. But ultimately, we ended up buying an island in the Maldives for $80 million, which is, you could buy several hotels in Sri Lanka for that. But because of what you just mentioned, there's all those issues about the regulation here, about foreign investment, about certainty on your investment, what's your exit, the tax issues. And Maldives, of course, has got a lot more sophistication in the market for that. So the confidence was there. Even though the market when we bought was at its peak, and we've seen the Maldives over the last year really, really soften. So, ultimately still a good investment because the rates are just ridiculously high and that they've got a very premium there. But I think for Sri Lanka to go forward, that whole structure's got to change, because the key difference between Sri Lanka and all the other regions we're working in, domestic demand is driving growth. Philippines, Vietnam, it's what you mentioned, the indigenous travelers are actually driving that hotel development because they're the main demand. Even Bali, it's the people from Jakarta that are fueling the Bali growth. So here, with an island of 20 million or so, you're not going to get that. So Sri Lanka really needs to therefore think outside the box and just open up, because you need foreign investment here. There's just not the capital to build that infrastructure and to build those hotels. Although you don't want the mega hotels, I think the boutique positioning of Sri Lanka is fundamental to its success.
I think that's a very good parallel, and like we hear a lot about Vietnam. The Vietnam infrastructure been set up. They develop new destination. There is a lot of developments going on, maybe too much. So let's say that in a few years infrastructure will be here. I mean, we saw the new expressway between the airport and going down south, up north is under plan. So let's say that in a few years this will be here. In terms of financial and legal facilitation for investors in Sri Lanka, what will be the parallel with Vietnam, for example? Is Vietnam that easy?
Vietnam's in a boom at the moment, having been through a mini financial crisis about 3-4 years ago, where the banks just almost went bankrupt and they somehow managed to keep it together. Similar comparisons, right? Interest rates were in their teens, making hotels impossible to build. That's all changed, and now it's a bit scary what's happening in Vietnam, because they're going through another boom again, and perhaps they've forgotten the lessons of the past. And we're seeing massive amount of hotel development and infrastructure, and that is the difference. That's where the government is coming in and building new airports, building that to support that growth, and building master zones. You have areas where, like in Cam Ranh Bay, where we've got a project coming up near Nha Trang, it's all master planned and zoned properly. So you get that Nusa Dua effect that you have. You get the Laguna Phuket effect, where you can create a cluster of hotels and create a destination. Here, with land title issues, you're never going to get that, I don't think. With the stupid railway that my forefathers built across the whole island, where you're not going to get beachfront big pieces of land because of the Gaul Road, because of whatever the situation is, you're not going to get that. So go back to the point of boutique hotel development. That's the way forward. Good. Let the Vietnamese and others build those mega resorts. But somehow you've got to have that balance where you still get the critical demand, critical scale.
Correct.
Just to add to what he's saying, I think that point about master planning and zoning is also fairly important, because what we see happening, especially in Colombo, is that because of the way land prices are in the city, it's become virtually impossible to think of developing anything other than a luxury hotel in the city. And therefore, the challenge is going to be that when you have a fair amount of supply that hits the market. And given that demand grows sequentially, whereas you have supply coming in steps, you're going to face that challenge of oversupply at some point in time, and pain, therefore, for the investors. If you're able to zone and master plan the entire development, it's possible to develop slightly the mid-scale sector as well in the economy. While I understand the point about focusing on boutique, I think it's also important to broad base the tourism in the country, so that when you go through the cycles, there is sufficient demand that gets driven by the mid-scale sector, which keeps tourism and the economy and the business sustainable.
So it's a cycle, as we saw in several destinations, and I think Thailand been through that. We saw some of the destinations like Phuket, which we all know there is a certain amount of oversupply somehow in the past few years. Government been taking some action again against Chinese tour companies in the last few months. That has a big impact on the arrival. But again, this is the fight again between quantity versus quality. And I think that's a cycle. You need the quantity to develop, but you want the quality. I think Sri Lanka is in this quality-driven type of strategy, but you also need the quantity. I think that's what Dusit is bringing with the project that you have. But Kevin, what's your view on that?
Well, I think I think people have to get on the plane and actually go and see what's happening in Vietnam. It's absolutely staggering. It's stunning, actually, to see a government get behind the market there. But I think the other issue that's often overlooked here is that while you have a growing market and while you have a certain number of rooms, a lot of them are quite outdated. If you go and look at the other markets, they've retooled. They've gone from some old resorts, the quaint ones, the Wongamat and Pattaya and places like that, and it's all brand new. Vietnam is probably spanking new, one could say. And here, the biggest complaint we hear from people when they go around is great country, great people, great food, lots to see, but the hotel I stayed in was really not value. It was, 30 years old, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's got to change here, because if you go around, the competition is building a much better product. I think today's millennial traveler who drives the markets, as Rustom was saying, certainly in India, certainly in China, certainly in Indonesia, Philippines, and even Vietnam today with 60 million domestic travelers, those kids want something fun. They want something vibrant. They want a lobby that says, wow. They want connectivity. They're not sitting around the pool. So it's a whole different experience that the very high growth market, which in most of those countries makes up almost half the population, is looking for. So that plays well to our dream product. I think it plays well to your D2 product, that sort of thing. So, that's really where the market is headed. And I think that's what the Sri Lankan investor or people who are looking here, as we and others are, have to start looking at. We think Colombo would be ideal for a dream. We think it's lacking that sort of a thing. You had the old supper club scene here. You had a few clubs in some of the hotels here. And I think down in the resorts in some of the southern areas, we have to be in a place where there's a lot of people who will come in from other hotels and other resorts who want some action, who want a good meal, who want to go to a beach club, which is a signature feature of all of our resorts.
You mentioned millennial and connectivity, and we hear a lot about destination marketing. I think this is all linked. And one thing that I've noticed, I've been here for maybe 3 days, went to a couple of restaurants. There were no internet connection, or people can interact, or people can share their experience. I think this is something that is very important nowadays. I think this is something that the government need to think about as well. When we talk about infrastructure and airports, I think internet connectivity infrastructure are also very important. And we saw the growth in come back to Vietnam, for example, was a great example of connectivity, and this is driven by all this young generation always on mobile and sharing with the rest of the world what their country is all about, what each destination is all about. Every airport, every restaurant's got connectivity. TripAdvisor is doing a fantastic job at marketing destination. This is something that Sri Lanka need to think about. What would you
Certainly,
say?
I think that is extremely important. But I think Sri Lanka does have, so in addition to, like Kevin was saying, things to do to have that interesting vibe and all that, millennials are also looking at experiential tourism. And I think Sri Lanka has a phenomenal amount to offer in terms of the culture, the heritage, and all of that. I think what needs to be done is developing that ecosystem to create stories and that interest around the phenomenal heritage that this country has to offer, and to be able to communicate that to the world at large, which will certainly add to the attractiveness of the destination. I think what the government has done is put in the institutions. So you have the tourism promotion and the marketing bodies, but I think what's important is to make sure that they communicate and they're able to actually get the people involved in a much better manner. So to actually create an ecosystem where the youth of the country is actually able to look at tourism from a livelihood perspective, from look at having all these stories to communicate using the medium of TripAdvisor. You have a vast amount of technology support that is available today, which wasn't available earlier, and that I think has been a great equalizer for in terms of the opportunity that exists. So I think if they can leverage that opportunity, it can have phenomenal benefits.
I mean, just to add on to that, I think it's also an opening up of the booking channels, right? Sri Lanka, Maldives, quite traditional in their tour operator focus. And I know some of the big boys in the room won't like to hear this, like Cinnamon, who control that supply chain, but it's going to open up, and that's just a tidal wave that's going to come. And I think we talk a lot about the public sector not, having to catch up with the infrastructure. That's where hotels and the private sector can really make a difference by getting good booking engines up and running. I'm staying at the ZMAX just across the road. 2 months old, lovely property, well fitted out, one of your former hotels, but very difficult to book online. It's a Chinese company, and it's actually all in Chinese, so they've got still a few teething issues to work out there. And if you book the Hilton, it would be through a much better rate through a tour operator, so why book online? So the OTAs are here, obviously they're here, but still there's a big opportunity missing in terms of getting that distribution that the millennials can easily book into Sri Lanka. I think the whole thing is still very traditional in its approach, and it's better for the industry just to open it up. As much as we hate the OTAs, they are getting people from A to B and bums on seats. So I'm happy to pay that commission if there's the demand.
But it's like something about, again, the quantity and the scale of the destination. As we highlighted at the beginning, it's very it was boutique centric as well at the very beginning. All the size of the hotel are pretty small. That's probably something that for large corporation, and we know that the whole industry is about getting large consortium buying everyone. So it's still a small market. That's why we always linked it to Maldives. I think it's important to see that the scale is needed as well. So quantity is something that need to be well balanced in the overall. Is one of the things we talked about this morning was open sky, and we talked about the airlines. The low-cost airlines have been really the key of development in emerging market like Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, Vietnam, AirAsia, we mentioned earlier, Vietjet. It's something that probably Sri Lanka need to focus on to open. Visa policy as well is something that a lot of countries, like Thailand, for example, had this exemption visa for Chinese for a while. Vietnam been changing their visa policy last year for several European countries as well to stimulate and bring back some of those markets. Is it something that Sri Lanka should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely. I've said it for a long time. You really, if you want to open up the country, because the road system hasn't caught up with the beautiful places that you can actually visit here. And I think from a regional point of view, you'd find many more people coming from, particularly in the Indian market, if you had domestic air connectivity. It still doesn't exist today. And I remember in 2010 when I was at Centara, we built the Centara in Pasikuta, which is now the Amaya. I said, look, I'll give you these forecasts, I'll give you these numbers for the 165 rooms, but it's not going to work if you don't have seaplanes going out there. And, you know, an hour away from here in the Maldives, there were two. Now there's one that's merged seaplane operator. And that sort of a thing running out to Pasikuta, to Aragon Bay, to Trinco. They've got a huge airport out there at China Bay, which is an old, well, still is a military Air Force base. And you could land wide-body planes on there. And here we are 5 years later, and we don't see that connectivity. I just read in the paper this morning that one of the Maldivian operators is thinking of coming over here and providing a regular service. So I don't know if Sri Lankan can jump in the picture. I mean, I talked to Paddy Witana on it before. That would really open up the country to jobs and to some of the really beautiful places. It would turn Pasikuta from a red situation, bottom line, to a black situation. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, just a voice on that. We're looking at a project in Palawan in the Philippines, and it's the connectivity at the end of the day. It comes back to that. Totally underrated. And I think, yeah, low-cost airlines, it's not opened up here, and that's obviously a key missing point. And you look at places like Phuket. Why is Phuket so successful? It has an international airport. People bypass Bangkok. When we had the protests, when we had the floods in Bangkok, it didn't impact Phuket. People could book direct. And now you've got all the Middle Eastern airlines flying quite regularly into Phuket. And that's, yeah, it's created a lot of volume. And Phuket, unfortunately, has, it's gone mass market. And that's where Sri Lanka can learn not to go. And it won't go mass market because of that bottleneck anyway. So you've got that. But surely, I mean, it's just about, as you say, there's so many beautiful spots on the East Coast. And that is just never going to open up until that connectivity is there. So.
Absolutely, completely agree.
In terms of visa policy and in terms of opening new markets, what would you see?
No, certainly, I think those are, in a sense, hygiene conditions that should be done immediately. Those will certainly have an impact. But the thing is that in India, we've waited a long time to open up the visa policy and all that for security concerns and stuff like that. But I think increasingly that is happening. I'm sure Sri Lanka will eventually do that. But I think it's a big way to facilitate business into Sri Lanka. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, Myanmar's done it, Vietnam's done it, right. Sri Lanka has done it. When I came here 4 or 5 years ago, it was a real headache. I had to get the visa still the old-fashioned way. Going to India is still, now it's gone e-visa. Those are fundamental differences, and that people make decisions on booking based on that hassle and arrival. And still arriving 2 days ago, the queues are long, yet the booths are all unmanned. So these seem like obvious solutions that you could just open up. And it's not to say that Bangkok and other places don't do a good job either, right? Bangkok, you can still queue up, but they've at least built the infrastructure to try as manage 30 million travelers. That's the issue. They've got 30 million. Here you've got not less than 2 million. So, the scale is there. It's just upside. It's just about then opening up the floodgates a bit and allowing that to happen.
All right. Thank you. I think it says time's up here. Maybe we have a few minutes for the floor if anyone's had questions. If not, I think everybody wants to have a coffee break. All right. Thank you very much.